I had messaged Brendan about this, maybe a few weeks or months ago too, but I find that it's actually pretty important for me to give a load number or like assign a TSS to my weight sessions, because it does, it's a very real fatigue that builds up. And, if you're not accounting for that throughout the season, you might look at your TSS or your CTL or whatever it is, whatever metric you're looking at, and think that you're doing less when maybe you're substituting some of your bike intensity for weight intensity. So figuring out a way to give yourself a reasonable number to track that is like an important thing that really doesn't have an answer. There's no formal way of tracking that. And I'm a bit surprised every time I look into it, all the forums, everyone just says, oh, it's impossible. It's a heart rate based thing. But I basically assign an arbitrary number. And then some of these guests that show up on Brendan's podcast also, Ashton Lambie will just assign a number, just so that he can account for it, even if it's not the most accurate. But it definitely factors into your chronic fatigue.
Dude, that's really good. I want to read a couple comments that popped up in the chat regarding this, regarding the riding on endurance days, or do you ride on heavy days? Lifting, lifting on the heavy day or lifting on the endurance day. Matt, who said, hey, I'm at work, I can't talk, but I move my sessions from on an easy day to an afternoon after hard morning rides with easy or non-interval rides the next day. And my overall fatigue was better since now I have easier days when not pairing them with lifting. And Jennifer kind of echoed the same sentiment, which is one thing that has come up. There's a couple, I should have made it a Cat 4 question. People were like, hey, what happens if I start lifting on endurance days? Now am I having too many intense sessions per week? And it does become really hard to gauge, even though we can put a TSS score to it. What are we really doing to our bodies over the long term? And my other comment to this is the 8-hour separation would be really hard, especially if someone's on like a high volume plan, because I've tried riding and lifting and I was like, this doesn't feel safe. And granted, though, I was doing an endurance ride at the lowest duration was 3 hours. Sometimes it's 4 hours. So to ride, even if I left at 6 and came home at 10, 8 hours later is 6 p.m. There's no way I'm going to lift heavy at 6 p.m. So athletes would have to consider their riding volume also. And yeah, James, that was really good. I appreciate you chiming in on that. What other questions or ideas or sharing the experience that people have out there?
I have a question. So I don't lift anymore. I did for a very long time, but I don't for a bunch of reasons. But I'm pretty interested in the idea of cycling economy. So I was hoping that either Patrick or somebody who can share more information than I have can speak on this, because I'm wondering if this is that in reference more to a muscle group aspect or a muscle fiber aspect, because it would make a lot of sense to me if you're referring to like improving your cycling economy by enabling yourself to use, say, your glutes. If you don't have good glute activation, like it's really clear if you're quad or hamstring dominant, why you'd be at a disadvantage versus someone who is utilizing all three of those muscle groups during a time trial or a really long road race. But in terms of muscle fiber, I'm a little bit more confused if that's what that was in reference to, just because from my understanding, most lifting is going to be utilizing like type 2X fibers and tapping into like ATP, CP energy system. And I don't really understand how that would like transcend into efficiency into like the lower energy systems. So I'm interested in the idea, but I just like want to know more about like what's going on under the hood.
Yeah, sure. So I did not, when I initially kind of started a couple of years ago looking into this, I found a couple studies that it's about motor unit recruitment. So, especially if you're focusing on low rep, high weight and building strength as opposed to building muscle, that you're getting more recruitment and therefore less fatiguing. So like at the same workload, your body is going to be at a lower cost. And so what they found in this study was that power at VO2 max and ability to hold threshold power in particular, both went up, even though there was no ventilatory increase. There was no gain from like aerobic aspect. It was just the lower metabolic cost. And that's kind of what they are referring to as cycling economy. And I'll try to find that original article and share it at some point. And then, you know, when it comes to, you know, quads versus glutes versus hamstrings, that's about finding the balance between, you know, we're not ever going to be applying force in an ideal position. You're in a cycling position. So that's why you see, you know, there's a difference between stiffness and being able to handle pressure, apply pressure to the pedals in a compromised position. So, you know, that's where you see Sagan has you know, that video everybody's probably seen where he's like doing crazy flexibility stuff, where he's not really holding a ton of weight, but he's increasing his capacity to work in compromised positions. And I think there's a lot to be gained there. For me, like I found that if I can get into a really deep squat and I can get my body really fired on and turned on that way, that I get on a bike and it's all of a sudden like my knees are further out. You know, like if you do band exercises before you get on a bike, like you'll notice like, wow, you know, maybe I'm VMO dominant, which is kind of not common. So my knees tend to go in a little bit. I have large VMO, but weaker outer quads. But if I do some of these glute activations, I notice my knees are getting further away from the top two and I'm getting better quad activation. I'm VMO and I have actually strong glutes. So, I mean, does that sort of answer the question? It's really about, the electrical signal that you're training. And that's why I'm all about trying to really gain that strength versus trying to put on muscle by doing higher reps. And then I mean, the movements that you do, especially as you're getting closer and closer to in season, should be more reflective of what your pedaling style is going to be, whether you're a sprinter or trying to focus on the time trial or going to climb exclusively out of the saddle. You can make and adapt changes in your program to better reflect that.
Gotcha. So the biomechanics side of that, I mean, it's all biomechanics, but like specifically like muscle groups and pedal stroke, like that makes sense. With what you're talking about with the VO2 power, but at no greater cost, are you basically saying in the study, the participants were producing their quote unquote VO2 power, but at like a lower respiratory exchange rate? So like they weren't necessarily hitting one, whereas before for the same power, they would have hit one, but
it was
the consensus was because of strength training. Sorry, I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to incentivize myself to lift.
Totally.
I don't feel incentivized to lift. So that's why I'm asking that.
Yeah, it was the same. They were the subjects, I believe, and I'll Google this and find it really quick. But the subjects were doing the same ventilatory threshold, but putting out greater power. And then a similar study found that they didn't increase their threshold power, but they increased their ability to hold that power. So their TTE went up. All right, let me just do a quick Google and I'll let y'all continue.
Sam, can you share, do you mind sharing so Sam is a powerhouse and he comes from the rowing world and he's focused on Nationals time trial in June. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, I was thinking you didn't want to lift because of the COVID and the gym being in Boston. Are there other things, or maybe share your history of lifting from if you guys were doing
that? Yeah, totally. I mean, number one is definitely like COVID. Like if I was, and it kind of ties into number two too, but like it was going to be really difficult time-wise to facilitate getting to the gym. And I think it all comes back to my personal like training hierarchy of needs. Like in the past, like over a decade plus of rowing training, I found, and many other athletes I know found lifting to be like non-deterministic outputs for like results, like, you know, putting out huge weight, but not actually getting faster. And so I think that for myself and a lot of other people that I've trained with, there is not a huge incentive to put the time in to lift heavy when you could be doing other things. And then for me personally, like most other people training, like I have a pretty demanding job and I'm training a ton of hours, and facilitating getting myself to and from a place where I can lift 3 times a week is just, to me personally, not worth it. And so I'm definitely interested in lifting again, but like the ancillary benefit, like the injury prevention, for example, is not as important to me, just because I've never been injured on the bike, and it could happen, but like rowing injuries and cycling injuries is very different. And so a lot of the lifting for rowing was injury prevention, because you need to have supporting muscles protecting, say, your rib area, because broken ribs are very common. That's not an issue in cycling, etc. So in my experience, like physiologically, I didn't see a lot of results over a long time for me lifting. And so there just wasn't the incentive there to go out of my way to do it. And so now I'm trying to educate myself a little bit further and understand deeper why I might want to, just because like I'm always interested in, you know, trying different things out to get faster. So
I wonder if it's even sorry, Patrick. I wonder if it's even beneficial for him to start with like the band work and the small things that we're talking about that you wouldn't have to go to a gym to do. Like, do you do like glute bridges and clamshells and that type of stuff?
Yeah, I do. I do a lot, actually. And I would kind of, I guess you could call it, I don't know, plyometrics or something, but I group that in with like core work, and then I further group that in with stretching, just because, like, for example, I know that I need a lot of glute power for the time trial position that I'm trying to develop. And it's a lot easier for me to recruit that muscle group if I do, say, glute bridges immediately before getting on the time trial bike. But so I do that stuff. I'm thinking more like, you know, your classic deadlifting and squatting, or what have you.
So given that you do have a history in lifting, probably that's just not a limiter for you. You have enough muscle mass for the task. Your limiter lies somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, so I did find those 2 studies, and one was actually pointing out that VO2 max did not go up, but ability to hold, I think the power is what went up below threshold. But, you know, like for you, given your goal is the time trial, like you're probably not running into a limiter in terms of, you know, motor recruitment. That's just not the issue for you. It might be somewhere else.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's what my thinking was too. I'll probably end up revisiting this with Brendan in the fall, just like post-mortem on 2021 and into the next year. But interesting. Thanks.
My quick comment on that is very timely is when you had said, hey, I didn't do 8 hours for Unbound because it was 36 and raining. That's a great day for the gym. So
yeah, but then I went back out.
Crazy. I see James Walsh down there, who is a huge lifter, and if you can talk at work, if you could throw some thoughts in here, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm not really working, so I was supposed to be riding, but it's like 35 degrees and about to snow, so awesome here. Yeah, I found, like, I mean, I've been lifting for over 10 years, so it's just always been part of the stuff that I do. But I noticed, like, when I stopped personally, I don't know if it's like being 43 years old, that I definitely am not as strong on the bike for me personally. Like, but I lift year round too. Like, I'm at the point now of lifting for so long where I really don't get sore or really notice that it's taking away from my riding. And about the whole like 8 hours in between sessions, I don't think that's like Brendan was talking about, like, that's not realistic for like a working athlete either. Like, I know for me, like, there's no way I'm going to get up at like 6 a.m., get on the bike, and then lift at 4. It's easier for me to like knock out a trainer session in the morning and then maybe like lift at lunchtime and then I think with that too, like you're getting more rest in too. If you're like bookending your day with 2 sessions, like you're going to be like more tired and sore in the morning. So I don't put too much thought, because to me, I like my training, like especially in Colorado, like this time of year is like all opportunistic, like as far as when I can get outside. So I've lifted on high intensity days, endurance days, back and forth, because it's like I'll move my schedule around so I can get outside as much as I can with the weather this time of year. So, but I keep my lifting days consistent. So I have at least like 3 days. Like I usually try to lift right now, like, or I guess 2 full days, like Tuesdays and Fridays, like 2 days a week. And then that seems to work good for me. Because if I like start moving those days around and there's like 1 day in between lifting, then like that's where I notice where like the lifting is just not as good. But like coupling it with, like high intensity work on the bike or endurance work, or the only day I won't really lift is like on a recovery day, like because that doesn't really like make too much sense to me. And if I was going to do anything, maybe I would like lift in the morning and then do like a super easy spin later in the day, just kind of like flush out the legs or whatever from the lifting in the morning. But yeah, I don't know. Like I start racing like this weekend, like a 200K race in Kansas. But I still plan on like lifting this week. And I kind of like transition to like from October to March is like lifting 2 times a week, super heavy, like squat, deadlift, all that. Now I'm doing just like 1 day a week heavy. And I've kind of like, I started just doing like the hex bar deadlift on my heavy day, because it's kind of like a combo squat and deadlift movement. It's like super athletic movement. Like a lot of like, I don't know, pro ball sports athletes do a lot of that kind of stuff. It's just like, and it's like, you're not going as deep as on this regular normal squat. And then you're also not like stressing like your lower back and stuff as much as maybe like a traditional deadlift, but you can still lift really heavy. And I find like I can lift really heavy at the hex bar and not have it like tear me up like as much as like traditional deadlift or like super heavy squats. But it's also weird, like new people to lifting, like it for sure is going to take away from your cycling, right? Like, but I think once you've done it for so long, like you stop getting like really sore, where it's like, it just, I mean, when you're that kind of sore, like it sucks to get on your bike. It even sucks to sit on the saddle. Like it's just you feel uncomfortable. Like, and so like generating any power then is like hard. But it also depends on like what your overall goal is too. Like mine's not just to be like a cyclist, right? It's like biggest thing, like lifting for other reasons too, like just the health side and longevity. And I don't get injured either. Like I've been, even with running and endurance sports for like 15 years, like I just don't get injured. And like, maybe that's because I've lifted the whole time. Like, I don't know, like no soft tissue, anything. I just, yeah. And I keep at 43, like I said, keep getting stronger on the bike. So like, I'm going to keep doing it. And it is like measurable. I know there's no like quantitative, like TSS or anything, but like, if you can say like, when you had these really good races, your build up to that, you were like squatting this amount of weight, like in that, like you can kind of measure it there, like just overall strength, how strong you were. It's not like FTP, like you said, I had a good race, my FTP was 350, or it's kind of the same thing. You can be like, up right before then I was squatting, 220 pounds 5 times, like you can kind of like, that could be kind of quantitative there, just how strong you are. And so, and I think like longer gravel stuff, I like the word like fatigue resistance, and that's where lifting comes in for me. I think when it comes specifically to cycling, is that the time under the bar and lifting heavy, just like it's kind of like riding endurance all day long, right? Constant tension on the pedals. So that's my thought. We'll see how it goes. I'm racing like 3 times in 4 weeks. So,
well, I love it. That's one of the pearls that just stuck out there for people that struggle with understanding what it means to like train through a B event. You're still lifting, because sometimes people who are, focusing on, maybe they have, let's say 5 big races, and they have a race come up and they get that feeling of like, oh, but I have a race, I need to like ease up. It's like, okay, well, are you going for this race, or are you still trying to build towards the bigger race? And like, oh yeah, okay, good point. I'm going to go back to the gym or A lot of good comments in there, James. We got a question that Jennifer brought up, and we can circle back to this. I just don't want to forget about this one. What do people think about muscle cramping during hard efforts or racing? You know, she saw a girl this weekend having to get off the bike on the last lap. Her legs were cramping so hard. She had mentioned how she experienced this after a week of not stretching or doing the strength training. What do you guys think of, you know, we are getting, Jennifer, if you can chime in on this too. Was it warm? Was it one of the first hot races? Do you think heat had anything to do with it? Or what do people think about the muscular side and cramping? Maybe that is like when we're talking about the glute bridges, when your quad cramps, it's because maybe one muscle group is just acting too dominant. And by the end of the race, she wasn't, you know, activated or firing everything. Just thinking outside the box. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, just to add to that, it was not hot. I mean, it was probably a little cold actually when we first started. So I don't think that had anything to do with it. I mean, I know my boyfriend, for example, cramps all the time when anything like a harder effort. I mean, debilitating cramps where he just can't even perform anymore. And it looked like this girl was the same. And then I experienced it slightly just from not doing some stuff, you know, the past week. So, you know, I would love to know if it's something that, you know, maintaining strength training could help with, or if it's something genetic, or we just don't know. And just for, you know, I've got to hop off at 12. So I know this is probably a long discussion, but I can always catch up with you later.
Yeah, we'll record this, and if anybody has to leave, don't feel like you are going to be rude. Jump in, jump out. I probably should have said that in the beginning, but great question, Jennifer. Who's got the answer?
I mean, there might not be an answer. I think that's it. It's like, I don't know.
I think to your boyfriend's point, of if he's cramping from super hard efforts, I would think that strength training would help with that, but maybe he's overutilizing a certain muscle group. I feel like Patrick Wally knows the answer to this.
Well, that's what I think. Like when I see the girl, you know, having to get off her bike on lap 5 of 5, lap 5 of 5. So you can tell she's getting a little bit crampy on lap 4, and then cramp 5 or lap 5, she has to get off her bike on a hill. So that tells you how bad the cramps were. So I'm like, that had to have been like a muscular fatiguing something going on there. It had to have been.
Could be. I mean, it's really hard to isolate cramping, muscular cramping. It could be nutrition. It could be hydration. It could be, you know, sodium levels imbalanced. It can be a number of things. It's so hard to isolate. That's why I think the group's a little quiet here. But, you know, it could be related to over fatigue of a muscle. But why is it fatiguing? You know, it's really hard to isolate. So we, you know, as athletes, we just try to make sure we're addressing all that stuff. We're eating well, we're hydrating, and not just, you know, if it's longer duration and it's hot, it's not just water. We also have to have sodium electrolytes, etc. So, you know, we just try to do everything we can to do it. But once it does happen, it's really hard to identify why.
Patrick, I just clicked on your link, so I'm gonna save that and read it.
Yeah, it's just talking about a new study that just came out. An athlete of mine shared this with me, and I didn't look too closely into it, but the gist was that if you have cramping issues, lifting heavy will decrease the likelihood of that happening. And it was a creatine blood marker, or they tested urine, and it was the markers were they were slightly different, even though their electrolyte balance was basically the same as those who had not lifted. That's the gist of it. But yeah, I think lifting definitely will help prevent cramps, but it's really, like everybody else is saying, it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what the root cause is at all times for cramps, because it's really situational and dependent on the person. Is easy cramping, I guess, early in a hard session or late in a hard session?
I mean, like when mine came on, and
yeah,
mine were not anything like what this girl experienced. It was later, and actually hers were later too, but mine were like in hour 3 of like even an endurance ride after I had a pretty big week. But again, it was a week of no strength, no band work, no stretching, no anything. And then I'm like, why are my hamstrings seizing up? I mean, out of nowhere, and they normally do not do that. So I don't know.
Could be a lot of factors.
I know, right? Well, thank you guys. I've got to hop off. But
Thanks, Jennifer.
Bye.
Any closing questions or thoughts from people? This was awesome. I had said that I was going to turn this into a guide of some sort, and I'm like, I think I'm just going to point people to this of being like, there's so many ways to go about this. And even as Sam was bringing up, like, you know, if you're he was making me think, like, if you're a time trialist or if you're like a classics rider, things are going to be different. And there's a lot going on. Any other topics people want to? I realize we're at an hour, and that's kind of what we marked it as. But if there's any last burning questions or thoughts, and we can do strength again, or we should, when people have topics, definitely submit them. This was awesome.
I want to emphasize one point that James made that we shouldn't overlook is you know, with time crunched athletes, where do I find my time to get that lift in? Well, I'll just do it on my recovery day. Bad idea. You know, we really need those days set aside really for recovery, and we don't want to add any more stress on the body. So keep recovery days as recovery days. Find your lift somewhere else.
What is it? Well, how do you do that? What if they're on? What is the answer to that? What if they're only riding 8 to 10 hours, let's say, and they want to do road races, or they need to get like a 2 or 3 hour ride in once a week? Or do we recommend that they do like stuff that they can just do at home so they don't have to go to a gym? Or
so then, I mean, what you're kind of asking is, does this athlete need a recovery day? So
no,
if you're
no, they need a recovery day.
Okay.
Where do we fit the lifting in though on one of the other how do we make the time? That's what we're trying to do. And so what I'm kind of thinking in my head of like, you know what you need to do when you're hanging out at home? You need to get your butt on the floor and do them then. Or like you need to, but some people are going to be like, no, I have 9 hours and I want to ride. I mean, do you just, okay.
I think that's the biggest thing with like most cyclists. You have to like, I think if lifting is going to be a good thing, you have to kind of want to do it. Like, I don't think it's like, if you have to like twist somebody's arm to lift weights, like what's the point? Like they don't think it's going to make them a better cyclist, then, you know, you can tell them all the time, go do it. But if they don't want to make time with it, or if they can say like, take 1 hour, instead of like riding 10 hours, ride 9 and lift 1 hour a week. And like, in my opinion, like for most, I mean, an extra hour like noodling around on your bike or an hour in the gym, like, you know, that's where you put your time. I think you're better off like lifting for 1 hour than.
Josh Noggle.
On that same point, I'm thinking like if you're in the base season and like here in the Northeast, it's a lot of time on Zwift, it's a lot of time inside. It's nice to just mix it up, do something different. And it goes along with enjoying it, but just something different than being on the bike.
And I think it's how you just like frame it in your training is like, if you like to lift and you believe in it, then you're going to want to do it and you'll make time to do it. But if you're like, oh God, gotta go to the gym. Like I wouldn't go either. I'd bag it and just go home like after work or whatever.
Also, I mean, you know, if you look at your athlete and you can see some garbage time in there and encouraging them to be more efficient on their rides, you know, now you have a domino of positive aspects going on. Hey, let's cut this zone 1 from 30 to 20%, and we'll get an extra hour there that way. So you're building a little bit of positive momentum that way.
Cool. Are we good?
Good.
Thanks everybody. This was good. Now I'm like rethinking a lot of things and getting some good thoughts. I like this. Thanks everybody for participating, coming. We'll definitely post this. This was super valuable, I think, and this will be a great podcast for a lot of people driving in a car. So if you have any other thoughts, feel free to email any of us, our first name at evoke.bike, and we will talk to you soon.
See ya.
Adios.